You can go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, good evening, everybody. As Barbara said, this is a quick update on a paper that I produced, published in Britannia in 1994. And it was really inspired by two new examples from Kingsholm, which you can see on the screen in front of you now. So I'm grateful to Cotswold Archaeology for the opportunity to present these. And I'm going to try and update on what ideas have changed since 1994 and the new examples that have been found. Just to refresh my memory, as well as anybody else that's actually seen my 1994 paper, I identified 7 different types of pendants manufactured from shed antler crowns. And a question I quite often got asked was, how do you know that the plain examples and the examples just with a simple hole in the middle were actually pendants? Well, I think the answer to that is quite a number of them have perforations for suspension. A number are found in graves. So I've just put one example here, the example from Colchester. This is an unpublished grave over a century ago, but you can see there, item 7 is a part of one of the plain Antler Roundel pendants. This is a 1st century grave, also with a fist and phallus pendant that Adam talked about earlier on this evening. We also have from Austria a type 1 pendant with a Cu alloy link in it. And I know this is decorated with a phallus, but the same thing applies. One from Hungary, which also has a Cu alloy link in it. So I'm pretty confident that both my types 1 and 2 were used as pendants. And if you have the opportunity to look at my 1994 paper, I go in there in a bit of detail about why antler crowns should be so used. And although I really want to talk about the ones which are phallic decorated tonight, just to very quickly say, since my paper, there have been a number of both type 1 and type 2 roundel pendants found, including one of the 2 from Kingsholm. I should have mentioned those 2 were actually found together in the same pit, a 1st century pit. But there are other type 1 and type 2 examples which have been found. And one type I really don't want to talk about because it's quite complex this evening on my type 3, which are ones with late turn centres, but just to show you that there are a number of new examples post my paper that have been discovered. Now, one of the things I emphasised in my earlier paper was that there is some geographical distribution of different types. And this is just 2 illustrations from a paper in 2006 showing that my type 1 and type 2 and type 3, which are the roundel decoration ones, are very common in central and eastern Gaul, away from the frontier area. And there are lots of these there, 50 or 60. And in Britannia, where we do find these, they also are away from what we might traditionally call the frontier areas. So I'll come back to that a bit later on in my presentation. The type of phallic decorated antler roundel pendants that everybody thinks about are these ones. And Adam showed earlier on this evening the example from Malton. I think the one that most people might be familiar with is the one from Newstead, which Curl published. People seem to think these are quite common, but actually there's only just over a dozen of these from Roman Britain. They're very simply made. Some of them are quite crude. This is thanks to Barbara for this particular illustration. This was excavated in 2016 from Vindolanda, and as you can see, it's late 1st century. They seem to be 1st or 2nd century in date. I've reproduced alongside, not to scale, the one from Hungary, just to show you that they could have been suspended on a Cu alloy chain, but I think most of them were probably suspended on a leather or organic substance chain. And it's very interesting that, as you can see from both the Hungarian and the Vindolanda examples, they were displayed phallus down. But there are other examples, which I've not put on here, which were displayed the other way up, phallus up. And I don't think there's any significance in which way round this works. I want to spend most of my short time talking about the other types of phallic decorated pendants. Now, in my 1994 paper, I called these my type 5, which were basically pendants with a rilled edge, very heavily worked, with a phallus in high relief and 4 drilled holes around them. Since that paper, in fact, there was only 2 examples then. There's been one from Castleford that you can see in the bottom left, which was excavated with 2 bronze or CU alloy rivets. An interesting one from Ribchester, which is very closely parallel to the Corbridge one. And very recently, one's been discovered on the Thames foreshore, which is the subject of a PAS record. So now there are 5 of these. The dating evidence is quite weak, but I strongly suspect that these are 1st century as well, and certainly the Castleford and Ribchester ones are. And I know of no examples from the continent, and I'll be saying later on that I've actually got a database now of 250 antler crown pendants. So the fact there are none from the continent just leads me to suggest that these particular types might be a British variant, but nevertheless, only 5 examples, so quite rare. Coming back then to the Kingsholm example, which you can see at the top. This was a very similar pendant to the one from Dorchester, which is the most complete example of the type, and also has, this is from a grave, a cremation, and it has an added phallus in the middle, which leads me to think that the other examples of this type, again, there are not very many, also had a phallus inserted in the centre. Again, quite heavily worked. Examples from Staines, Dorchester, one from France, and there's also one from Germany, which I don't have an image of to show you, but only about 6 examples altogether. And I suspect, again, these are a 1st century form. The one from Kingsholm should be pre-Flavian or early Flavian, and the one from Germany, from the frontier, is also mid to late 1st century. And there just may be one other example. Another example from Gloucester. This is the only image I have. I've never seen this, but I'm fairly sure that this looks the same or similar to the one from Dorchester. And you can, around the base of the phallus, you can just about make out, the slightly raised area. And again, the 4 holes, which originally would have been filled with CU alloy rivets. Gloucester's interesting because there are actually 5 antler crown pendants from Gloucester, which is the most from anywhere in the province, although there are also 5 from London. Why there should be so many from Gloucester, I'm not sure, but the numbers are quite small everywhere, which emphasises how rare all of these forms are. And tonight, although I'm not talking about the last of my types, which are the type 7 pendants, which are basically lathe turned with a rilled edge, and there are only 4 of those, but 2 of those, one from Mainz and one from Worms, both have an inserted phallus, just like the one from Dorchester. So as I've worked on these in the last few weeks, after I got to know about the ones from Kingsholm, I suddenly realized actually there's another variant of these. If you look at the top 2 and the top left, the ones from London, these are actually the same pendant. This was actually first published in 1990. The one on the left is taken from the Museum of London database, and unfortunately, somewhere along the line, it seems to have lost its 4 CU alloy rivets, which you can see from the 1990 publication were clearly there originally. On the published image on the Museum of London database, you can make out some staining just around a couple of the holes here. What's interesting about these pendants, which still have the CU alloy rivets in them, is the rivets are flush with the back, so that they should, I think, be decorative rather than functional. They're not really tying the pendant into anything at all. And so I'm stopped calling these pendants, and at the minute I'm calling them fittings, and they must have been applied to something. To what? Well, the back of that London example actually has some plaster still adhering to it. So just maybe these forms were applied, and I'm talking now about all of the ones with the 4 rivets, applied to a backing, maybe a building or a piece of furniture or something like that. Just looking at these types, you can see they're quite widely distributed from France and from Germany, from the Netherlands. But again, very low numbers. There are only about 7 of these known, but they are all very, very similar. And it does make me think that the similarity of some of these types does suggest that just perhaps they are part of a single workshop. So going back to where I started, the 2, what I called antler pendants from Kingsholm, I now think one is a pendant, which is the type 2 one at the bottom with a central perforation, but the one at the top of my type 6 isn't a pendant at all. It's a fitting of some sort and maybe a piece of furniture or something like that. But you know, until we find one in situ, which is probably very unlikely, we don't actually know. So in conclusion, I now know of about 250 examples of antler crown types which have been used for a variety of decorative functions. And in 1994, when I wrote my paper, I kind of divided them between phallic decorated and non-phallic decorated pendants. But now I think they should be divided by differentiation of use. So my type 1s to 4, I think, are pendants which were suspended around the neck, but my type 5 to 7 and the new type I've discovered are applied fittings. In terms of geographical distribution, there's a tendency for the plain pendants, that's my types 1 to 3, to occur from away from the frontier zones, and that's true of both Britannia, the Gauls, and the upper and lower Rhineland provinces. Pendants types 1 to 4 seem to have been suspended with an organic tie, but occasionally with a CU alloy chain and worn around the neck. And the ones that everybody always thinks of, which are the ones with a simple phallic decoration, and I showed you a new one from Vindolanda, these are geographically very widespread. They occur throughout Britain. They occur all the way down the Rhine and along the Danube. But they do have a preponderance for the frontier areas. So if you just think back to the map I showed you, the distribution in central and eastern Gaul, lots and lots of examples, all without phallic decoration. But the minute that you move slightly to the east, the frontier area, you start to get more examples with phallic decoration. Of the type 4, none of them really parallel another one. So I think these are just one-off items that individuals have made. But those with more complicated working and decoration, the ones with the 4 CU alloy decorative rivets or domed rivets, I think that these are something different. They appear early, 1st century, but they're very small in numbers. I think perhaps because the 3 or 4 types are very similar in their decoration and method of manufacture, that they may be, I put here workshop products, perhaps that's a bit grand, but I think that a small number of hands have made these, one of which seems to be a specific British regional variant, although bear in mind there are only 5. But the types are linked by 4 perforations for bronze or CU alloy rivets, which are flush with the reverse. So almost certainly mounts of some sort rather than pendants worn around the neck. And just a few acknowledgements and a list of the references for anybody that wants to either take a screenshot or look at this when it goes online on the RFG website. Thank you very much.